Welcome to our channel, where we bring the most bone-chilling stories from the depths of Reddit's darkest corners. Join us as we explore the eerie tales that keep you up at night. If you like what you hear, please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notifications to never miss a spine-tingling story. Danny, I grunted, resisting the literal call of the waking world and rolling over, burying my face into the pillow. Danny. The call came again, still soft, but a little more insistent. I let out a sound which, to me, sounded like what? But in retrospect, was likely little more than a grumble. A moment later, I felt hands gently shaking my shoulder, and I reluctantly allowed the waking world to chase away the last vestiges of sleep. Danny, wake up, darling. It's almost noon. Paula's words caused me to open my eyes and look at the old-school alarm clock on the bedside table. She was right. According to the two hands, it was 11:43. All right, I'm up, I grumbled, the words actually passing from my lips as I forced myself to sit up in bed. Paula sat on the edge of the bed next to me, already dressed in a white button-up shirt and a pair of slacks. A smile played over her lips as our eyes locked. "Good morning, Sleeping Beauty," she proclaimed. "How do you feel?" I rubbed my eyes, feeling the throb from last night's rather excessive drinking session already starting. "Aside from the jackhammer team already going to work behind my temples, I'm great," I said sarcastically, earning a laugh from her. "Well, you did decide to go more than a little overboard with the alcohol, darling." I gave her a sly look. "Maybe, but you didn't seem to mind that when we went to bed." Paula's cheeks turned red, and she gave me a gentle push, giggling softly. I threw the covers back, sliding my feet down onto the carpeted floor. "Anyway, what have you been up to while I've been snoring away?" I asked. She gestured to the old-school television which stood at the foot of the bed. I slept like a log as well. After I ordered up some room service, I decided to try watching some TV, see what sort of stuff Vegas has on its channels. She gave me a perplexed look. But it's the weirdest thing. All they were showing were reruns of extremely old TV shows from 60 years ago or so. Although, I did enjoy this sort of neat game show that was playing called I've Got a Secret. They should really bring that back. I shrugged my shoulders. I guess they're really playing up the old school angle with this hotel. Sort of a stay with us and take a step back in time sort of thing. I allowed an annoyed look to fall over my face. Although I'm not sure I'll leave a glowing review where I was forced to use my lucky vintage bill. When we checked in, it had ended up being a slight bit of a hassle. For whatever reason, neither of our credit cards were able to be accepted. It had been a surprise, as we've never had a problem using them before. And since we'd both decided to not carry cash with us on the trip and get it out of an ATM once we'd reached the hotel, I was forced to use something rather precious to me. It was a vintage $1,000 bill. Something I'd bought years ago, before the prices on them on eBay went through the roof. Luckily, even though they haven't been circulated in a long time, they can apparently still be used as legal tender, since it was accepted by the manager. To say it was painful to hand it over, though, was an understatement. The only thing that made it somewhat bearable, however, was the amount we had to pay. Almost shockingly, it cost a fraction of what the quoted price for the Venetian had been. For that, I was grateful. Paula rubbed my shoulder. "Well, at least you bought 2 of them from that collector. You still have the other one at home." I gave a small smile and nodded at her. God bless this woman for always helping me look on the bright side. "Well, let me get dressed, and then we'll head downstairs. I'd like to get something for brunch myself, at least a cup of coffee. Then we'll plan out what to do today. All the tickets they gave us will give us plenty to do the next 2 weeks." The hotel apparently hosted a nightly show called Casino de Paris, a sort of retro burlesque-style performance, which we'd been given tickets to watch for almost the entire duration of our stay. In addition, we'd been given tickets to shows playing around the city. They were all for tribute acts, though, such as one for a Frank Sinatra and Friends tribute act, which was playing over at another hotel and casino I'd never heard of before called The Sands. Quickly brushed my teeth, and the two of us were locking our room and heading for the elevator. A fresh-faced man who apparently operated the elevator controls greeted us as the doors opened. "Going down, sir?" he asked as we stepped into it. "Yeah, lobby please," I said, still feeling a bit hungover and sluggish. Obediently, he pressed the button and the doors closed, our descent beginning down to the lobby. As the soft elevator music pierced my ears, I looked around and noticed that the elevator operator was eyeing me rather strangely. I looked down at myself. I don't see anything on my clothes that would warrant him looking at me like that, I thought. Finally, he spoke. "If you don't mind me asking, sir, are you two from the same place as the others?" he asked. The question threw me for a bit of a loop. What do you mean?" I asked in return. He shrugged his shoulders. "Nothing, sir. Just, we sometimes have guests who drop in who..." He shot me another quick look before finishing. "Who look, well, like they're not from around here." He shook his head. "I'm sorry, sir, that was rude of me. My curiosity just got the better of me." For a moment I stayed silent, the awkwardness and, frankly, weirdness of the man's question making me feel equal amounts perplexed and weirded out. But I resolved to be polite. I shook my head. "It's quite all right," I said, and let the silence fall over us again. I felt a particularly sharp stab of pain behind my eyes, and I closed them, reaching up and rubbing my thumb and index finger into them. Blue spots exploded in the darkness behind my eyelids, and I let out a soft groan. "Hey, do you know where the nearest place is I can get a bottle of aspirin?" I softly asked the man, still rubbing my eyes. He didn't respond. My shoulders slumped, and I let out a soft sigh. "Excuse me, sir?" I said a little louder. I still received no reply. Feeling a little frustrated, compounded by my pounding head, I pulled my hand away from my face and opened my eyes, ready to give the elevator operator a piece of my mind. But any verbal lashing I had built up in my throat died away. The elevator was completely empty, aside from me. What? Both Paula and the attendant had, seemingly, vanished into thin air. I twisted around, looking behind me to see nothing but wood paneling. Okay, what the fuck is going on? I know I didn't hallucinate stepping into the elevator with my wife or seeing the attendant. I fought back the rapidly rising waves of confusion and worry, stepping forward and hitting the already lit up button for the lobby 2 more times. As if my repeated jabs, it would somehow spur it on quicker. But it simply continued descending, unhurried. Finally, the loud ding announcing its arrival to the lobby sounded, and the doors slid open, to reveal pitch blackness. The only light was what spilled out from the elevator, lighting up a long, rectangular stretch of floor. "Okay, what the actual fuck?" I whispered quietly. I most certainly wasn't taking a damn step out of the elevator into the darkness, not when I had no idea what was happening. I remembered my phone suddenly, reaching into my pocket and pulling it out. Snapping the screen open, I found the flashlight icon and hit it. Instantly, a bright white beam of light sprang forward, shooting out into the dark. I stepped as close as I dared to the open doors, and leaning out slightly, panned the light around. It bounced off the massive, empty shape of a secondary employee desk, a luggage cart piled high with suitcases sitting unattended in front of it. There wasn't a soul in sight. Is there a power outage or something? I wondered. But no, it wouldn't explain the absence of everyone. Maybe there's a solar eclipse or something happening outside and everyone's gone to watch it. I pushed that idea away as well. I hadn't heard of any eclipse coming up in the near future, and again, it wouldn't explain why the people behind the counter and all the guests disappeared. Not to mention where the hell Paula and the elevator guy went. That was when the light in the elevator began to flicker. My head snapped up to look at it as it began to rapidly blink off and back on again. "Oh, you have got to be fucking kidding me, really?" I hissed out between gritted teeth. It was like the inevitable, predictable conclusion of a damn horror movie, one of the oldest tropes in the book. Swallowing hard, I looked around to see if there was anything I could snatch up to defend myself if need be. But there was nothing remotely in that category, barring if I wanted to try and rip the metal door for the elevator's wiring system off its hinges. I felt my pulse quicken as the light flickered on and off quicker. Every time it plunged me into complete darkness, save for my phone's flashlight, my heart pounded in my chest like a drum. I had no idea what the hell to do. It felt as though I were in a lose-lose situation. A heavy hand suddenly fell on my shoulder, its fingers feeling as though they were jamming into the skin. I let out a half scream as I attempted to twist around to see who had grabbed me, but the grip tightened, shooting a wave of pain through me, and I was thrown forward. I sailed through the air like I was a rag doll before crashing to the marble floor. The breath was driven from my lungs, and I let out a cut-off cry of pain. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, and I flipped onto my back, sitting up as quickly as I could. I still clutched my phone in my hands, somehow having held onto it during my short flight, and I aimed it back towards the still open elevator doors. I felt all the blood drain from my face as the beam landed on a figure. It was dressed in all black. Either that, or it was all black, all except for its eyes. It was as if whoever or whatever I was staring at had a ski mask over their face, made of a material I'd never seen before. What seemed to be like holes had been made around the eyes, and the ones that stared back at me almost looked to be human. Except no human I'd ever met had ever had that much sadistic glee in them before. The figure stepped out of the elevator, and a pang of absolute terror coursed through me as I saw it was holding what appeared to be a fire axe in its right hand, one which seemed to already have blood on its blade and handle. Oh, hell in a handbasket. I scrambled to my feet, attempting to put as much distance between myself and the axe-wielding figure. Then, the elevator doors closed, plunging the lobby, save for my phone's tiny flashlight, into utter blackness. My heart felt as though it were about to explode out of my chest as I saw the figure take another step towards me. It was slow, deliberate, almost as if it were trying to anticipate my next move. I quickly looked around, making sure to keep the menacing shape in my peripheral vision as I searched for somewhere to go. I knew the second I made a break for it, the figure would make a lunge for me. I couldn't explain how I knew, but I could simply tell it was waiting for me to make the first move, and it was relishing the tense moments in between. An idea suddenly surged forward in my brain, one which, if I didn't time it perfectly, would likely wind up with me pulling a Dick Halloran from The Shining and ending up with an axe in my stomach. Or my head. I tensed up every muscle in my body, looking towards the left as though I were about to run towards the entrance hallway. I saw the figure also tense up, now holding the axe with both hands. I suddenly put all force into my legs, using the floor almost as a sort of springboard. Years of track and field instinct kicked in, and I feigned starting to dash to the left. Instantly, the figure was a blur of motion, raising the axe and dashing silently towards me. I turned and shot backwards, forced to turn the light away from my attacker as I made my leap. Behind me, I could practically feel the air being parted by the axe, and a second after beginning my leap, heard it smash into the marble floor where I'd been standing not a second ago. But I was sailing through the air, praying I'd calculated correctly. Fortunately, I did, as the edge of the desk passed underneath me, and I landed on the floor behind it. On the other side, I finally heard the figure let out a sound. Ah! It sounded like a cry of frustration and rage, and it motivated me to leap to my feet faster than I thought possible. I flashed the light around, catching the heart-stopping view of the shape running towards the desk, raising the axe over its head. I didn't wait to see what happened next. Instead, I ran for the open partition which separated the employee area from the rest of the lobby. Behind me, I heard the figure vault over the counter, landing with a heavy thud on the floor. But I'd already ran from behind the counter. I knew I couldn't make it to the entrance lobby, and instead, I aimed for the first door my light caught in its beam. It was a silver metal door marked Employees Only. Thank you. A moment later, I smashed into it with my shoulder, the door crashing into the wall with a massive bang. Behind me, I heard the pounding footsteps of my pursuer, and without knowing where I was going, I ran. I'd wound up in some sort of employee hallway, likely one of many which wound their way through the hotel and casino. A rack of sheets flew by in a blur on my left, and I came to a T-junction, opting to turn right. I heard the door to the lobby smash open as the figure entered the hallway, and I used the sound as motivation to run faster, despite the fire that seemed to be burning in my leg muscles. A few seconds later, I came to another T-junction, this one seemingly identical to the last. I chose to run to the left this time, but as I did, something I saw for a split second caught my eye. It was a security camera, one which had been aimed down the hallway in the direction I'd come from. I didn't have much time to see all the details on it, as I was too busy running for my life. But there'd been enough time to notice one particular detail. The red, blinking light showing it was recording had flashed out into the darkness. The realization flew away from my brain as I was too preoccupied with staying a hallway or two ahead of my pursuer. I could still hear it behind me. The thundering of its footsteps drowned mine out entirely. Ahead of me, I saw another metal door, this one with no lettering on it. The hallway also broke off to the left and right, but I'd already decided I was going through the door. With any luck, I'd find a place I could hide for a while, allowing the figure to assume I'd kept running in a different direction and break away from me. It would give me not only a chance to catch my rapidly dwindling breath, but also double back and find the door I'd entered the back hallways to. From there, I could run to the entrance. My plan set, I poured on all the power I had remaining in me, the door flying up to greet me. I lowered my shoulder and smashed into it, flying into the room, where I slammed into something which knocked me backwards, halfway back into the hallway. I let out a cry of pain as I landed on my ass, the stabbing feeling traveling up my tailbone and spine. I snapped my phone up, aiming the flashlight into the room to see what I'd slammed into. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that my heart stopped. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a tidal wave of abject horror flood into every fiber of my being. The beam had caught a figure, standing less than a foot or two away from where I lay in a crumpled heap on the floor. One which looked identical to the one which had been chasing me. Like the other, this one, too, carried an axe, though this one had no blood on it. I twisted around, wondering if my pursuer had shot down an alternate corridor to get ahead of me, anticipating my move. But no. I could both hear and now see it running down the hallway towards me. Towards us. I spun back towards the newcomer, and felt, if possible, an even greater wave of horror shoot through me. The figure wasn't alone in the room beyond. A second had moved into the beam of the light. It was joined by a third, then a fourth and fifth. In the span of 10 seconds, the light showed at least 7 or 8 of the figures in the room. Behind me, I heard my pursuer slow to a speed walk. I began to scramble backwards on my hands and knees, out towards the right branch of the new hallway. The figures from the room followed, spilling out in slow, silent pursuit. They met my pursuer there, where they stood, still silently, watching me scramble away. Then, they began to laugh. They all began to laugh. It sounded like human laughter, men's laughter, but it was filled with absolute evil and menace, and they slowly began to walk towards me. My scrambling intensified, and in my hasty retreat, I forgot to keep watching where I was going. I felt something slam into the back of my head, while simultaneously, a painful jab poked me in my left arm. The arm which had been holding my phone. On reflex, I dropped the phone as I jerked my arm back. It clattered to the floor, the beam of light aiming directly up at the ceiling. I looked behind me and saw I'd backed into another linen rack. The stabbing sensation had been me hitting a sharp edge, which had pierced the skin. I twisted back around to see how close the figures had gotten. And I let out a half scream. All of the figures stood almost directly over me. They'd used my moment of distraction to get in close, cutting off any way for me to escape. My breathing came in short, ragged gasps as I realized what was about to happen to me. As if they'd read my thoughts, all of the figures began raising their axes. The almost maddening sound of their laughter returned as they held them high over their heads. My life suddenly flashed before my eyes, snapshots of being a young child, a teenager, turning 18, meeting Paula. Then, a single, clear thought. Oh, fuck, this is going to hurt. I raised my arms in front of my face in some pathetic attempt to ward off the multiple blades about to cut me to ribbons. The blades suddenly whipped down at me, and I closed my eyes, letting out one last scream in defiance of my fate. "Danny!" The voice cut through the sudden silence, one which was only broken by the soft sound of elevator music. Realizing I wasn't feeling the piercing pain from multiple axe blades, I slowly lowered my arms and opened my eyes. Paula and the elevator operator knelt by my side. Both had a look of major concern on their face. I became aware I was back in the elevator and that I was laying on the floor. For a moment, I couldn't find the words to speak. Then, what happened? Paula let out a huge sigh of relief that I'd answered. We had a moment where the elevator went offline for a moment. It went black for a few seconds. You must have fallen asleep standing up during it because right before the power came back on, you suddenly began screaming. Her voice trailed off, and I realized how frightened my wife was. But I was still attempting to make sense of it all. But it felt so real, I thought to myself. The blackout, the figures pursuing me, the pain, it felt real. My mind seemed to race at 1,000,000 miles an hour. The elevator attendant spoke up. "Did you get a decent night's sleep, sir?" he asked with a tone of concern. For a moment, I debated on my answer, then decided to speak truthfully. "Honestly, no," I said weakly. "My wife and I didn't get much sleep, and I drank a lot." The man nodded, a relieved smile crossing his face. "That's what I figured. Sleep deprivation, combined with the large amount of alcohol, will cause you to fall asleep for short periods of time and experience horrifying dreams." He reached down and grabbed my arm, pulling me to my feet. "My older brother's a doctor, is how I know about that," he explained. I felt Paula grab my arm to help study me as I mulled the man's words over in my head. They made sense. A lot more sense than what? Suddenly appearing in some alternate reality where everyone had disappeared, everything was black, and figures with axes were chasing you. I nodded, trying to push away a small voice in the back of my head that attempted to argue that, despite the man's words and the rationalizations my brain was attempting to make, that it had been real. But it seemed that the rational part of my brain won out. I pushed away the nagging voice and attempted to bring myself back to reality. "Are you sure you're all right, darling?" Paula asked me, her voice soft and low. I looked at her, then nodded my head after a moment. Yeah, I'm okay." I let out a deep breath. "I guess the incident that happened in the parking lot last night is still in the back of my mind is all." She nodded understandingly. "That makes sense," she said, then smiled and leaned forward to kiss me. "Just please don't scare me like that again." I allowed myself a small smile and pulled her close to me. "I'll try my best not to," I said. A moment later, the elevator let out a soft ding and the doors opened, revealing the brightly lit and bustling lobby. I turned to Paula. "Go ahead for a second, sweetheart," I told her quietly. "I want to tip the attendant for helping us." For a moment, she seemed concerned with leaving me alone, and then she nodded, stepping out of the elevator. I turned back to the man, pulling my wallet out from my back pocket. "Look, sir, I'd like to give you something for your troubles with me," I said, as I rifled through the massive amount of bills which now filled it from breaking up my $1,000 bill the night before. The man began to protest, but I held up a hand. "I insist. It's my way of saying thank you." He looked as though he wanted to try and protest again, but instead, he stayed silent and nodded. I finally decided on giving him a 50. With inflation being the way it was, everyone could use a helping, generous hand every now and then. I pulled it from my wallet and pushed the bill into his hand. For a moment, he stared down at it, and I saw an almost stunned look pass over his face. He looked as though I'd handed him a solid gold bar or something. Wow, other guests must not tip these people that hot if he has this much of a reaction to just $50. Shaking my head at how sad that was, I nodded to him and stepped out of the elevator, replacing my wallet in my pocket. I turned back to look at him one final time before the elevator closed, and I involuntarily took a step backwards. The man had fixed an odd and rather intense gaze on me, one which was unblinking. I can only describe it as more than a little eerie. And then the elevator doors closed. I let out a bewildered snort and turned away. I gotta post a tweet about that odd encounter, I thought, and reached into my pocket for it. But it wasn't there. "What the hell?" I muttered, checking my other pockets. I knew for a fact I'd slipped my phone into my pocket before we'd left the room. In fact, I'd even said something about it to Paula. "Wait a minute, honey. I'm not leaving my phone after charging it all night, I'd said. I replayed getting up from the floor of the elevator in my mind. Had I seen it dropped when I stared down at my feet for a moment? No, I hadn't. I raised my left hand to scratch at the back of my scalp, a coping mechanism for stress I'd done since I was a child. A sudden stabbing pain coursed through my arm, causing me to let out a bit of a gasp. Lowering my arm quickly, I brought my other hand around to feel the back of it. Another ripple of pain emanated from the area, and I pulled my fingers back to see small droplets of blood on them. The hell did that happen? I muttered quietly to myself. The memory of the waking nightmare suddenly flashed through my mind. I remembered scrambling back, straight into the linen rack which had stabbed into my left arm, exactly where the wound was. A shiver suddenly shot up my spine. It was just a nightmare, a dream, wasn't it? I shook my head. It's just a fucking coincidence, you moron, I muttered. You hurt yourself in the elevator, that's all. Get a damn grip and stop going mental on me. Shaking away the nagging thought, I stepped forward to rejoin my wife. Together, we walked the length of the lobby until we reached the main section and approached the check-in counter. The same man as last night, whose name, according to the name tag pinned to his chest, was Arthur, spotted us and smiled wide. "Ah, good morning to the two newlywed lovebirds," he exclaimed, holding out his arms in a similar manner to how he had last night. "How did you two sleep last night?" Paula let out a snort. "We slept okay, but I think this one," she gestured to me, "is going to lay off so much of the alcohol for the rest of the honeymoon." The man, Arthur, let out a good-natured laugh. Well, I can't fault him. The first few weeks after being married are always a joyous occasion, but sometimes you can overdo it. I let out a snort. "You're not kidding," I grumbled. Paula turned to give me an amused look, then looked back at Arthur. "Do you have any place that serves coffee and either a late breakfast or lunch here? I'd like to get some food and caffeine into him." Arthur let out another good-natured chuckle, then gestured to the front hallway. "Of course. We stopped serving breakfast at 11, but if you'd like lunch, our fabulous restaurant, Dome of the Sea, is just outside, a short walk across the parking lot." He leaned forward. "And between you two and me, their lunch menu is to die for." He let out another laugh, causing both of us to chuckle at the man's cheesy pun. I nodded. "All right, thank you, Arthur," I said. He raised his hands. "Don't mention it. It's what I'm here for." He cleared his throat as we turned away. "By the way, there's a special show happening tonight, taking the place of Casino de Paris. It's called La Parisienne, direct from France, and there's going to be a special guest tonight in it." He looked around, then grinned at us. "Have either of you heard of a singer and actress named Diana Dors?" I looked to Paula and shrugged, my mind drawing a blank. She returned the gesture. "No, unfortunately not," I admitted, turning back to the man. He gave a shocked face. "Well, then you're in for a treat tonight. Just use 2 of your tickets for the other show. They'll be valid for this show. And just wait until you hear the singing voice this dame has on her. I'm just happy she's been a regular on our stage for the last year or two." I looked to Paula and gave an interested look. She nodded. "Sure, thanks for the heads up. We'll check it out," I declared, then rubbed my pounding temples. "After I get coffee and food." He laughed, then waved us away. "Have a lovely day, you two," he called after us. We strode outside into the hot, arid air. As we left the shade of the entrance, I shot a look up. A large statue of what looked like an Arabic sultan stood atop the entrance area, the yellow letters spelling out dunes stretching out to either side of him. One hell of a mascot, I thought. As we approached the entrance to the restaurant, a huge circular building, something caught my eye. It was an old newspaper vending machine, the kind with an all-glass front. Holy shit, I haven't seen one of those newspaper machines in years. I thought they stopped using them. I stopped Paula for a second to drop a quarter into the machine and opened it, pulling a newspaper out and tucking it under my arm without looking. I'd read it inside. "What, trying to act sophisticated and old school to match the hotel, darling?" my wife asked with an amused smile. I laughed, then gently pushed her forward and into the double doors. The inside of the restaurant was, to use a single word, beautiful. It lived up to its name, done up in an aquatic theme, with an ornate dark blue roof stretching overhead. Water-filled, grotto-like areas stood around the tables, and surprisingly, a live band played in one corner. As we were led to our table, I noticed something which threw me for a bit of a loop. All of the people having lunch in here were done up to the nines in clothes. All the men wore suits and hats, looking like they'd just come from a big power meeting, and the women all wore very fancy-looking dresses. That wasn't the only surprising part about them. All the suits and dresses looked old-fashioned, to put a word on it. Even the younger patrons, ones about our age, were dressed up that way. They all seemed to stare at us as we passed, as if we'd each grown 2 heads. Okay, that's honestly a bit weird. But I put it out of my mind as we sat down and ordered our meals. The coffee was brought to me immediately, and the hot liquid pouring down my throat felt like a godsend. It almost made me forget about the horrifying experience in the elevator, as well as my lost phone and injured arm, both which I couldn't honestly explain, and instead kept mentally pushing away. The positive atmosphere and calming music seemed to help. I set the mug down and picked up the newspaper from the table. "So, what do you want to do for the rest of the day until the show tonight, babe?" I asked Paula as I turned the front page towards me. "Well, I was thinking we could take a drive up and down the strip, get a feel for all the casinos and restaurants. Then we could find a place to maybe stop and play a few slots. I know, you always told me they're rigged, but I'd still like to play them at least once. Oh, and then, if we have time." She continued on, but I wasn't listening to her anymore. Every sound in the restaurant seemed to have been turned down, like someone with a television remote had hit the volume down button. I swear I could hear the blood rushing through my head, and I felt my mouth go dry as cotton. My heart began to beat almost as fast as it had in my chase, real or imaginary, and I felt as though the whole world were spinning. I kept staring at the front page of the paper, at the picture on the front of it, and at something else. Finally, a sound cut through the seemingly muted noises. "Danny, what's wrong, darling?" Paula asked me, reaching out and taking my free hand in hers. I lowered the newspaper and stared at her. My face must have been pale as a sheet, because I saw extreme concern crease her beautiful features. "What?" she insisted. It took a moment to find my voice. Paula, sweetheart," I said weakly. We might have a problem." Silence for a moment. "What?" she asked, then looked at the paper. I saw her put 2 and 2 together. "What did you read?" she finally asked slowly. I set the paper down in the center of the table, turning it so she could read it. I saw her lean in and mouth the words. I saw her expression change, from concern to utter shock. She snapped her head up at me as if to search my eyes for an explanation, but I had none to give. The picture on the front of the page was of John F. Kennedy. I can't remember the exact headline it proclaimed above it, though I know it contained the words President Kennedy. But even now, almost 3 months being back, I can still perfectly recall the date displayed under the newspaper's name. July 22nd, 1962.